What is today? Well, today is 9/11. Today is September 11th. And in leftist circles, it's often pointed out that there are two horrendous events in recent history that happened on September 11th. The most recent being September 11th, 2001, when the World Trade Center was hit by two airplanes. The Pentagon was hit by an airplane, and thousands of people, almost 3,000 people, lost their lives. And the second was September 11th, 1973, when the Chilean government was violently overthrown by the military with the support of the United States, and thousands of leftists and communists and socialists and innocent civilians were rounded up and killed and tortured or shot down in the streets, and it was a pretty horrendous event. Now, both of those events are important to talk about. But I want to remind you all, I'm going to talk about both of those events. Both of them. And I'm going to show you why what we do on these broadcasts is so important. Because for both of those events, there is a standard leftist understanding, which is true, but is just scratching the surface. And for both of those events, I can provide you with a much deeper analysis. Because if all it took was the standard surface level interpretation of both of these events, if that standard leftist answer to both of these events that standard leftist analysis, the Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, Abby Martin, Brian Becker analysis of these events, if that standard leftist analysis of these events would suffice, we would be living in a much better society right now. The left and the socialist and communist groups would be leading millions of people, and we'd be on the road to socialism, but we are not. And so that indicates, you're on the list, that indicates that we need a deeper understanding. With 9/11, the standard leftist interpretation of 9/11 is true. It's that the United States has gone all over the world, overthrowing governments, bombing people, just murdering people. And somebody turned around and did that to the United States. That is 100% true. Now, it used to be that in leftist circles, you'd also get people who said that the military-industrial complex may have known that 9/11 was going to happen or allowed it to happen, etc., for political reasons. Now, you don't hear that so much in leftist circles anymore because it's been sent out that conspiracy theories are right-wing. So you're not allowed to question things like that. I think there's a lot of holes in the official story of 9/11. I'm not going to tell you who did it. I'm not going to say the military-industrial complex did it or Israel did it. I'm not going to say that because I don't know that. I do know that there's things about the official story of 9/11 that seem a little odd, like where was NORAD? And how closely planes are tracked in the sky. We're led to believe that there were 4 different planes that went on. I mean, there's a lot of questions. A lot of questions about 9/11. Questions are fine. But when you start saying what actually happened and you don't know, you're in dangerous territory. And I don't know what actually happened on 9/11. I do know there's new questions from Gray Zone about the background of the hijackers and their ties to the CIA, and there's that. And I know that there's questions about, there's all kinds of questions about all kinds of things. But we don't know what actually happened. We just know that the official story of 9/11, it's hard to buy. And we have the 28 pages now. People ask questions about Building 7. There's a lot of questions that are there. The official story of 9/11, there's a lot of holes in it. That's all we know. But regardless, you're not even allowed to say that in leftist circles anymore. With 9/11, that first narrative that I just laid out to you was everywhere. That first one, that America has killed so many people around the world, and that this is just somebody striking back. I wouldn't say it was everywhere. Most of the country after 9/11 got whipped up into a crazed, deranged, pro-military, pro-war frenzy. And it was very frightening. It was very, very frightening. I was a kid. I was in 8th grade when 9/11 happened, and my little hometown, we were miles away from New York City, and my little hometown turned into like a 24/7 military parade practically. For months, for almost a year after 9/11, there was a TV in every classroom showing CNN or showing Fox. And it was just, we were constantly having to do stuff, make candy bags to send to the troops. And we had teachers who were giving us, ranting about the fact that, Muslims, they don't believe in the Bible. That's why they did 9/11. The 10 Commandments say don't kill, but they're not Christians. And, it was Islamophobia like crazy. My family, we had hosted a student from Pakistan, and I knew what a Muslim was because we'd hosted this student from Pakistan. And I remember just the fact that, that I said, well, I've met a Muslim before. My family's hosted a student from Pakistan. People in my town are like, oh my God, a Muslim? Oh my God, maybe Caleb's involved in 9/11. That's how small-minded and bigoted people can be sometimes. But, after 9/11, my little town turned into a 24/7 militaristic, rally practically. And the country was whipped up into a very scary state of jingoism and militarism. You're on the list. It was very scary after 9/11, and I was certainly uncomfortable with how things were. But the response of the left to 9/11, the response of Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, and the response of Ward Churchill and others was to say, the United States has killed all these people around the world. That is true. Now someone has attacked the United States. True. That is technically true. There's nothing false in that. The USA killed millions of people in Vietnam. The USA killed millions of people in Korea. The USA bombed and starved Iraq and killed hundreds of thousands of people, and eventually invaded, used 9/11 as a pretext to invade. That was later, but, they had already bombed Iraq a bunch of times and starved people in Iraq, and that it's true. That narrative is true. And that was the response that leftists gave. And that was, in terms of public relations, one of the greatest blunders. The greatest blunders I have ever seen. The American socialists and communists were going out of their way to make themselves unpopular and to say the opposite. And this is important. The opposite of what the global communist movement was saying, what all the anti-imperialist countries were saying. After 9/11, Gaddafi, whose country had been bombed by the United States, who'd been subject to sanctions by the United States, whose daughter had been murdered by the United States, what did Gaddafi say after 9/11? Did he say, oh, this is the great Satan America getting what it deserves? No. Gaddafi said, wow, Al-Qaeda attacked America. I've been fighting Al-Qaeda for years. Maybe this is a chance for America and Libya to get along. Gaddafi even offered to torture people to help America catch Osama bin Laden. Cuba, that's a country that's been subject to horrendous sanctions, by the United States, crippling embargoes, attempted invasions at the Bay of Pigs. What did Cuba say after 9/11? Did Cuba say, "Oh, America gets what it deserves"? No. Cuba offered to send doctors. Did you know this? Cuba offered to send doctors to New York City after 9/11. And they said that Osama bin Laden and these jihadist, Wahhabi extremists, they're awful people. And if America wants to cooperate with Cuba to fight against them, let's do it. Syria, Ba'athist Arab socialist country. What did they say after 9/11? They said, we will support a war on terror, and we've been fighting these people for years, the Muslim Brotherhood and the Wahhabi fanatics from Saudi Arabia. We will help torture people. They even volunteered to help torture people. They said, we want to team up with America to fight these people. That's what Iraq said. All over the world, all the anti-imperialist countries, their response to 9/11 was, yeah, wow, you just found out what these people you've been arming and training all over the world are doing. You've been training terrorists and extremists and sicking them on our countries. And they kill people and they do awful things. And now you know, so now maybe you can work with us to defeat them. That was what all the anti-imperialist countries said. That's what Russia said. Russia said, we've been dealing with these people in Chechnya for years. We've been dealing with these people in Afghanistan. And I mean, we've been dealing with these people for years. The whole anti-imperialist bloc was sympathetic to America after 9/11. And they said that this shows how dangerous Islamic extremists are. And the USA has been turning a blind eye to Saudi Arabia while it arms and props these people up. The USA, Brzezinski, has been arming these people and supporting them all over the world. And all the anti-imperialist countries said that they wanted to team up with America to defeat Al-Qaeda. That was their position. The American people who wanted to kick bin Laden's ass and wanted to fight Al-Qaeda, and Libya and Iraq and China and North Korea and Cuba were on the same page. They were on the same page for once. This is the message. I can show you the statements. All the anti-imperialist leaders were excited. They said, this is an opportunity. They understood how to play the game. They knew that the United States, after 9/11, would have to take some action against Al-Qaeda. And so they knew that that would create an opening for them to improve relations with the United States by fighting against Al-Qaeda. And so the socialist countries had the correct approach. The anti-imperialist states had the correct approach to dealing with 9/11. They had the correct approach, was just to say, we hate Al-Qaeda, we hate bin Laden, we want to align and stand in solidarity with the American people who just got attacked. We want to fight these Wahhabi extremist people. That's what they said. But I want to show you what the U.S. left said. All right? Noam Chomsky said, oh, America is the big terrorist. Ward Churchill compared the victims in the Twin Towers to little Eichmanns and said that average Americans deserved to be killed because they weren't protesting against the U.S. government and the sanctions it imposed on Iraq, which is weird because Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. But Ward Churchill wrote this whole essay called Some People Push Back, basically saying that average Americans didn't care enough about the sanctions on Iraq and weren't protesting about it enough, so they deserved to die. And in his essay, he compared the victims in the Twin Towers to little Eichmanns, to Adolf Eichmann, who was the Nazi war criminal hung by Israel. And then this statement, this is one of the worst things, the worst examples. This is probably the worst example that I can find of a statement made in the aftermath of 9/11. This is from Yuri Kochiyama. Yuri Kochiyama was a Japanese-American activist who was a friend of Malcolm X and was very close to the Revolutionary Communist Party. She was a leader of Asian American communities in San Francisco. This is what Yuri Kochiyama said after 9/11, and we can forgive her. She was over 80 years old at the time, you know. She was over 80 years old, and, you know, to some degree or other, you have to think she just didn't know what the fuck she was saying. But somebody was handling her, and this was the atmosphere. And among the boomer left, the Ward Churchills, the Noam Chomskys, the Howard Zinns of the world, this is what they said. This is Yuri Kochiyama. This is what she said. She said, "I'm glad that you are curious why I consider Osama bin Laden as one of the people that I admire. To me, he is in the category of Malcolm X, Che Guevara, Patrice Lumumba, Fidel Castro, and all leaders that I admire. They had much in common. Besides being strong leaders who brought consciousness to their people, they had a severe dislike for the U.S. government and those who held power in the U.S. Bill bin Laden may have come from a wealthy family, but at the time he was 20, he came to loathe the eliteness and class conduct of his family. Not true. You ask, should freedom fighters support him? Freedom fighters all over the world, not just in the Muslim world, don't just support him. They revere him and they join him in battle. This is bullshit. This is not true. Cuba didn't say this. Iraq didn't say this. North Korea didn't say this. Libya and Gaddafi didn't say this. This is unbelievable. The only people who said this, the only people who made statements like that were the idiots who run the American communist groups. Brian Becker, Sarah Flounders, Bob Avakian, they all made statements like that. And it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. It's completely nuts. And of course, what did the American people do when they heard this, right? They were all afraid of being bombed and attacked. They saw the Twin Towers go down in smoke. Everyone was terrified of terror attacks and orange alerts. And so, of course, what did the American people do? They immediately joined the Revolutionary Communist Party. They immediately joined the Workers' World Party. They immediately joined the Answer Coalition, right? They immediately joined the Democrat Socialists of America. Of course they didn't join. The country had just been attacked. People were afraid for their lives. And the PR department of the American left said, our job is to say the terrorists who did this are good guys. Now, is it any shocker that the American people didn't listen to these people? Is it any shocker that the American people overwhelmingly supported the invasion of Afghanistan? It shouldn't be a shocker at all. Imagine you just got punched in the face. Imagine you were walking home from work and someone punched you in the face and robbed you. You came home to your spouse and you said to your spouse, I just got beaten up and robbed. And your spouse says, well, 10 years ago, you robbed somebody. And all kinds of people all over the world get robbed every day. So, you kind of deserve it. So, I mean, that robber is kind of a hero because you have more than him. Of course you would say to your spouse, get the fuck out of my house. I just got robbed. No one wants to hear that. It was the worst message. And all the legit communists in the world, the communists in Vietnam didn't say that. The communists in Cuba didn't say that. The communists in North Korea didn't say it. The communists in China didn't say that. The communists in Laos didn't say it. None of the actual communists or anti-imperialists in the world talked that way after 9/11. Gaddafi didn't talk that way after 9/11. Saddam Hussein didn't talk that way after 9/11. None of the actual communists in the world talked that way after 9/11. But all the American communist groups got it in their heads that Osama bin Laden was some kind of great anti-imperialist, a third world revolutionary fighting against the American empire, which he was not. Osama bin Laden is from one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia, and he was a proxy of the United States against the Soviet Union. He built an army of jihadists from around the world to go to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union with CIA guns and CIA money and money from drug cartels in Pakistan. He was a heroin dealer. Osama bin Laden was one of the wealthiest billionaires in the world, and he, due to his religious beliefs, decided to become a warlord billionaire. And he did the dirty work of America in Afghanistan, and he did the dirty work of America in Syria. He did the dirty work of America in Iraq. He fought against revolutionary Marxist governments around the world. And for reasons unbeknownst to us, because a lot still remains classified after 9/11, there's been great journalism. And you're on the list. Don't worry, you're on the list. There's been great journalism done by Gray Zone about the 9/11 hijackers and their ties to the CIA. And the 28 pages showed that some of them had relatives and family members at the Saudi embassy that were helping them. And, that is just horseshit. Osama bin Laden was not a third world revolutionary. Osama bin Laden was not an anti-imperialist. Osama bin Laden was the leader of a deranged pro-imperialist counter gang of fanatics that was used by the West to attack anti-imperialists. Show me one place where Osama bin Laden was actually fighting against the United States. Afghanistan, he was on America's side. In Iraq, when he fought against Saddam Hussein, he was on America's side. In Libya, when he fought against Gaddafi, he was on America's side. In Syria, when he fought against Assad, he was on America's side. All of Osama bin Laden's life, he was on the same side as the U.S. imperialists. He was on the same side as the Pentagon. He targeted the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan and the Soviet Union, just like the United States imperialists did, just like the Pentagon did. In Chechnya, he targeted the Soviet Union and Russia, just like the United States did. In Syria, he fought against Bashar Assad and the Syrian Arab Republic, just like the United States did. In Libya, he fought against Gaddafi, just like the United States did. He was on the same side as the United States. And then, for reasons that still aren't clear, he and his network brought down the World Trade Center, attacked the Pentagon. So, why did the American communists immediately announce that Osama bin Laden was, you saw the quote from Yuri Kochiyama. It was utterly horrendous what she said. This is what Yuri Kochiyama said in the aftermath of 9/11. It's utterly horrendous, right? What she said, I showed you what she said. Right? There's a part 2. She compared him to Malcolm X. She compared him to Fidel Castro. She compared him to Che Guevara and Patrice Lumumba. This is nuts. It's nuts. And all the genuine communists and anti-imperialists weren't saying that. But her statement didn't stop there. It continues. It continues. Oh, yes. She didn't stop there. Yuri Kochiyama continued her statement. She said, this is what she said. These are her actual words. You stated that some freedom fighters responded that bin Laden's agenda is more reactionary and does not speak to the needs of the masses of people who exist under U.S. dominance. Bin Laden has been primarily fighting U.S. dominance, even when he received money from the U.S. when he was in Afghanistan. He was fighting for Islam and all the people who believe in Islam against Westerners, especially the U.S., even when he was fighting the Russians. That's a fucking lie. That's just a lie. That's not true. There's not a single place in the world that Osama bin Laden was not on the side of U.S. imperialism. You're on the list. You're on the list, Dan. Not a single place. And the response of the American left to 9/11 was horrible. We basically told the American people they deserved it. That's what we did. We told the American people, you deserved it. And the guys who attacked you are great heroes. And none of that was true. And none of the communists around the world were saying anything close to that. But you know what's weird? What's weird about that? Right after 9/11, they immediately decided they were going to use 9/11 to invade a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. And what country was that? It was a revolutionary anti-imperialist country, Iraq. Iraq that had been armed and had an economic partnership with the Soviet Union, that had sent weapons and military support to the Palestinians. Iraq, Ba'athist Arab socialism, close ties to Cuba, close ties to North Korea. And the message of George W. Bush was that somehow Iraq was involved in 9/11, and that has been completely debunked. That was a lie. They claimed that because one of the hijackers had gone to the hospital once in Iraq, that proved Iraqi involvement in 9/11. They claimed they made it was outrageous. It was utterly ridiculous. There was no Iraqi government tie to Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda were Saudi Wahhabis, Islamic fundamentalists. Iraq was a secular Arab nationalist and socialist government aligned with Marxists. They were on opposite sides of the political spectrum. In the Middle East, there is a wide variety of viewpoints, right? But mainly in most Middle Eastern countries, there are two political currents that are at odds with each other. You tend to have nationalists, Arab nationalists, that tend to be tied in with the military and tend to be more historically anti-imperialist, friendly to the Soviet Union, etc. That's, you have Arab nationalists, and they tend to be backed by families that are close to the military, families that are close to the military wing of the government, etc. Arab nationalists. And then you have Islamists, and Islamists tend to be lower level capitalists that aren't in with the military. And Islamists, they don't emphasize Arab nationalism. Many Islamists are not Arabs. They tend to be Turkmen. They tend to be Kurds sometimes, but they emphasize religion, and they're not tied to the military. And they tend to be more pro-American and more free market. And this is the push and pull you get in most Middle Eastern countries. You have the Arab nationalist bourgeoisie that favors ties to the Soviet Union, that often is more secular, in favor of a secular government, emphasizes the Arab nationalism. And then you have the mercantile bourgeoisie that is oriented toward Islamism and is more free market, tends to be with the Muslim Brotherhood, rejects Arab nationalism because Islam is for anybody who converts. It's not just for the Arabs. Rejects Arab nationalism and favors pan-Islamism or Islamic trade, and is more free market oriented, etc. This is the push and pull. Saddam Hussein was about as far as you can get in the spectrum of Arab nationalism. He established an Arab nationalist government, Ba'athist Arab socialism, that was aligned with the United States. He was the leader of the military that took over Iraq and established and nationalized the economy, established Ba'athist Arab socialism. There were Christians in the Iraqi government. There were women who held government positions. His position was that if you're as long as you're an Arab, you're just as much a member of my country, no matter what your religion. Saddam Hussein was an extreme Arab nationalist, secularist, socialist. On the other hand, Osama bin Laden, a billionaire from Saudi Arabia, was an extreme Wahhabi who believed that they should copy the Islamic government of the Caliphate of the 1400s. They should go back to the government that existed in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, that rejected any notion of Arab nationalism, was 100% in favor of some kind of religious, fanatical government, supported the Saudi kingdom because he believed that monarchies were ordained by God to be the kind of government you should have. Osama bin Laden was the opposite end of Middle Eastern politics, right? You could not get two. It would be like, I'm trying to think of an example. It'd be like Martin Luther King Jr. and the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay. I'm trying to think of another example. It would be like, Richard Dawkins and Jerry Falwell. These are two guys in Middle Eastern politics, in the politics of the Middle East and the Arab world, that could not be further apart. Osama bin Laden was diametrically opposed to everything that Saddam Hussein stood for and vice versa. And Osama bin Laden had fought Saddam Hussein on the battlefield. He aligned with Iran during the Iraq-Iran War. Osama bin Laden's networks had carried out assassinations and bombings against the Iraqi government. Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with each other. They were bloodthirsty enemies. But after 9/11, George W. Bush, the president of the United States, told us, oh, they're the same. America's been attacked by terrorists. And those terrorists, Al-Qaeda, are tied in with Saddam Hussein. You see, I've got special intelligence that Iraq was involved in the 9/11 attacks and that Osama bin Laden was tied to Saddam Hussein. And there's no logical reason that any of this could be true. I'm just making this up because I'm the president of the United States and the American people are now traumatized by a horrendous attack that just happened. And because of that, because the American people are traumatized, see, I am going to try to manipulate them into supporting an invasion of a country that has nothing to do with it. In fact, my invasion is actually going to help people like Osama bin Laden by killing one of their enemies, Saddam Hussein. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was utterly unbelievable. But the left and George W. Bush agreed. The left and George W. Bush agreed with each other. The left said, oh, America's been attacked by anti-imperialists and revolutionaries. And George W. Bush said, there's an anti-imperialist revolutionary named Saddam Hussein. He's the one who did it. So we got to go invade Iraq. And the messaging was the same. That is very suspicious. And especially if you point to what I told you before about how the communist governments of the world were not saying this. The communist governments of the world weren't saying this. So that is a deeper message. No one's going to talk this way about 9/11. No of the other communist podcasters are going to give you this insight. But I'm telling you that the message of the American communists after 9/11 should have been Osama bin Laden is bad, and now is the time to team up with Gaddafi to fight him. Now is the time to team up with Saddam Hussein to fight him. And, let's enter an alliance. Let's form an anti-terror alliance with Russia and China to fight Al-Qaeda. That should have been the message. We should have hijacked the American people's anger about being attacked by Osama bin Laden, exposed the Saudi relationship and the ties and the anti-communism of bin Laden, gone out of our way to present Russia and China and Iraq and North Korea as friends of the United States to fight Al-Qaeda. That's what we should have done. But instead, we did the opposite. We did what Yuri Kochiyama did, and we made it sound like we supported Al-Qaeda. We made the American people feel like they deserved to be attacked. It was utterly horrendous. Utterly horrendous. And that there is why the U.S. left, I maintain, is controlled. I maintain that the U.S. left is completely controlled. And that is an insight you will not get anywhere else, right? I can guarantee you Ben Norton, he ain't talking this way on his, on his streams. And I can guarantee you that, that none of the bread tubers are talking this way. I'm giving you an insight. As somebody who was a participant in these movements and someone who has been to the anti-imperialist countries, about how the American people how the so-called left got it wrong after 9/11. And that is an insight you will not get anywhere else. Now we'll move on to the earlier 9/11. September 11th, 1973, the government of Chile was overthrown. Salvador Allende had been the elected president, And he had nationalized a number of industries. He was in an alliance. He was the leader of the Socialist Party of Chile, and he was in an alliance with the Communist Party of Chile and with the Radical Party of Chile. And they had a coalition government. It was called the Popular Unity Government. The Popular Unity Government, the Popular Unity Coalition, and they ran the government in Chile. It was social democracy, and they were trying to peacefully transition towards socialism. We're trying to peacefully transition towards socialism, and the military. Augusto Pinochet was a military figure, violently overthrew the government, arrested and executed Salvador Allende, rounded up thousands, about 20,000 leftists and communists, and tortured them to death. And it's really, really a horrendous thing. And there's no way to gloss around that. I mean, it was just a horrendous event that happened. And what I find to be infuriating is that there are a lot of libertarians who like it. And I'm not exaggerating, right? There's a lot of libertarians who think that somehow this was good. Even though libertarians claim to believe in freedom, even though libertarians are supposed to be advocates of free speech, etc., there's a lot of libertarians that are just so seething in their hatred of communism that they think that what happened in Chile was great. They make helicopter memes about it. They joke about dropping communists out of helicopters, which supposedly was done by the Chilean coup plotters. I remember after the 2008-2009 financial crisis, there were a lot of libertarians who were saying America needs a Pinochet to privatize everything, because after the overthrow of the Chilean government in 1973, usually, and this is the thing, and I'll get to this in a minute, but Chile was not the first time the U.S. government had overseen a coup that overthrew an elected leader, right? Indonesia, 1965. Sukarno was a socialist leader, and the CIA overthrew him, right? And installed a brutal dictator who, killed hundreds of thousands of people. And, Barack Obama was living there at the time. And his stepfather, Lolo Suharto, was a leader of the Indonesian military who was involved in it. And it turned into a genocide against ethnically Chinese people. And Guatemala, 1953, Jacobo Arbenz was an elected leader, and he was violently overthrown in Guatemala. And there's many, many, many examples of this happening. Many examples. What made Chile different? And this is important. What made Chile different was that usually what would happen is that a military junta would take power, and that military junta would do kind of what Park Chung-hee did in South Korea, or what the various military juntas in Argentina had done, is that they would use the military to create some industries, and they would take care of their friends. And the middle class of these countries would get wealthier because the military government would hand out contracts and hand out the loots, and the middle class would become loyal to the military government. And then they could effectively crush the labor unions and the working class and the peasantry. And that's usually what happened, is that they would, Park Chung-hee, he developed the cities in South Korea. He made a prosperous middle class in South Korea. Various military leaders, that's generally what they would do. The USA would bring them to power. The Shah of Iran is a great example. The Shah of Iran, he carried out the famous White Revolution, and he carried out economic development projects, and to stabilize the country as the military dictator, right? The USA overthrew Mossadegh in Iran, 1953. They had a coup. And then after that, you had the Shah. And what did the Shah do? The Shah redistributed land. He gave women the right to vote. And he created an airline. And he carried out some level of economic development to stabilize the country. What made Chile different is that they didn't let the military junta of Chile carry out economic development. Instead, they implemented neoliberal economics. Again, this is an insight you will not get from Ben Norton. You will not get from any of these so-called people on the internet. They just like, oh, awful coup. It was awful. A lot of people died. Well, yeah, that's true. But it also, a lot of people died in Indonesia. A lot of people died in Iran. A lot of people died in Guatemala. There's many, many countries where this has happened. But there is something unique about Chile. In Chile, they brought Milton Friedman, the Chicago school economist. They brought Milton Friedman into office. And Milton Friedman implemented radical free market policies that destroyed Chile's economy. Usually these military dictators would come into power and stabilize the economy. Not in Chile. In Chile, Pinochet was he basically got into power and he said, all right, wreck my country. 30% unemployment. Insane inflation. They immediately cut all the subsidies to food. Salvador Allende had implemented all kinds of food subsidies to lower the cost of food. All of that was lifted, right? So all the people who worked in government jobs immediately got fired and lost their jobs. And then all the food subsidies that made the price of food in Chile affordable went down, were gotten rid of. There was a mass crisis in Chile of malnutrition. People starved to death. Children were fainting in school because they did not have enough food. There were a lot of children who didn't have food, and the only food they were getting was the school milk program. They gave free milk to kids in school. So there were kids who were depending on the milk in school because that was the only way they could eat because their family was unemployed. They'd gotten rid of the food subsidies. So then Pinochet cut the food school milk program. And there was literal starvation all over Chile. There was a man-made famine. And the United Nations, this is so sick, and I dug this up. It's shocking to me. The United Nations sent people to Chile to study the impact of malnutrition on psychological development. And they did studies about, what happens if somebody is, if a child is eating, everything's fine until they're 4, and then all of a sudden they can't get food anymore. And they did all kinds of studies. The United Nations did all these studies about the impact of malnutrition on children's development. Now, there were children that never learned to walk because they didn't get food. And because they didn't get food, their brain did not develop the fine motor skills to walk, and they never learned to walk. There are thousands of people in Chile who lived, they didn't die from malnutrition, but because they were children, they were 1 or 2 years old in the aftermath of this ugly coup that was brought on by the United States, they are mentally retarded. They're mentally disabled because they were children. And immediately, Pinochet came in there and he just wrecked the economy of Chile. Boom, 30% unemployment. Can you imagine 30% unemployment, right? 10% unemployment, and there's almost riots in the streets in this country. 30% unemployment. Boom, no food subsidies. Boom, no school milk program. It was genocide. It was economic genocide. There's no other way to describe what was done. Go and read Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine. It goes into great detail about this. Go and read Lyndon LaRouche's great book, The Ugly Truth about Milton Friedman. right? There is a lot written about this. The shock therapy economics that they implemented on Chile was devastating economically. So these and the economic miracle that happened in Chile didn't happen until like 1982. These libertarians who want to tell you, oh, the economic miracle of Chile was from libertarianism, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Chile did not have its economic miracle until 1982, after Pinochet fired Milton Friedman. After 3 or 4 years of economically devastating Chile, selling off all the state industries and all of that, finally, Augusto Pinochet feared he might be overthrown, and so he kicked Milton Friedman out of the country and he started renationalizing things. And the economic miracle that happened in the early 80s in Chile happened after the military in Chile completely moved away from libertarianism. So anyone who looks at Chile and says, oh, we need a Pinochet now, they're out of their minds, number one, and it shows you that they're just evil. Some libertarians, there are certain libertarians that are just evil, okay? Most libertarians are not. But there are some libertarians who really don't care about economic data. They just want to kill communists. They are Ayn Rand objectivists. They are triggered by, they're the kind of person that is afraid to feel empathy for another person, right? They feel they feel like if they feel empathy for another person, that'll make them weak somehow. So they want to impress everybody by how they have no empathy. And so they want to impress everyone by how mean they can be. It's this Ayn Rand mental illness that, the libertarian objectivist types have. And they are aroused. They're like, yeah, I want to kill communists, drop them out of helicopters. Yeah, I don't want those poor people to get food. I hope they die. That way they don't reproduce because they're inferior. It's that kind of evil, satanic libertarian, right? They're the ones that have this mythology that somehow what Milton Friedman did was good for Chile. It was not good for Chile, economically speaking. Again, is Ben Norton going to talk about any of this? No. Ben Norton's just going to go on and on about, oh, evil America carried out the coup. Is that true? Yes. But I'm giving you a deeper analysis. I'm giving you a deeper analysis than this, right? Is that the Chilean coup was unique because it brought in neoliberal shock therapy economics. And it was a laboratory for neoliberal shock therapy economics, and it proved that it doesn't work. So much so that Pinochet, in order to avoid being overthrown, had to move away from them. And that there's all kinds of money and documentaries and films all trying to convince you that neoliberal economics, libertarian economic policies were good for Chile. And it's a lie. Basic economic data shows the opposite of the truth, right? And it's just like how they said communism never worked anywhere. It clearly did. Russia and China became superpowers. Libertarian economics did not work in Chile. It devastated Chile, economically speaking. But there's all kinds of money and all kinds of selective interpretations trying to convince you that somehow what Pinochet did in 1973 by letting the Chicago boys, the Chicago School of Economics, wreck Chile, that somehow that was a good thing. It wasn't. The statistics speak for themselves. Mass unemployment, mass hunger. What was done in Chile economically devastated the place. But I go on. There's a certain crowd of leftists, and I've noticed this, and it's very interesting. Amy Goodman, Noam Chomsky, Francis Fox Piven, certain crowd of leftists who seem to believe that Chile is the only place that ever had a coup. It's very weird. They don't ever talk about the coup in Indonesia. They don't ever talk about the coup in Iran. They seem to think that Chile is the only country that ever had a coup. It's weird. There's an obsession with the Chilean coup, especially among Latin American leftists. They talk about the Chilean coup. They don't talk about the coup in Guatemala. They don't talk about the coups in Argentina. They don't talk about the coups in Brazil. They don't talk about the coups in Peru. It's like they think that Chile is the only, I mean, and it's weird, right? And if you talk to them, they know these other coups happened. They know that these other coups happened, but they just don't get the same amount of attention. And that's interesting as well. And again, these are insights you will not get from other people. Right? I'm giving you insights here that other leftists, other socialists won't give you. I'm talking about the economic impact of the Chilean coup. I'm talking about other things. But like, take a look. This is a clip of Frances Fox Piven, the labor historian. This is her argument with Milton Friedman, where she brings up the coup. And it's been a while since I've watched this, but I think that this is relevant, right? So let's put it on. I guess it's been a while since I've watched this. I won't say too much about it. But this is Frances Fox Piven confronting Milton Friedman about the coup in Chile.
About the free enterprise system and its capacity to produce both freedom and greater equality to relieve poverty, the test of that argument has to be made everywhere that the free enterprise system has been extended, has penetrated. The test of your argument is not only in what happened to England and the ostensible decline or not the decline of the English economy or what happened in the United States. The test of that argument has to look at what the free enterprise system has meant for the majority of people who do not live in England and do not live in the United States, who do not live in the mother countries, but rather live in that part of the world where most people live and where most people have had their lives disrupted. Peasants have lost their land. Traumatic destruction.
Excuse me, you got to compare
because of the free enterprise system.
Excuse me, you've got to compare something with something. Will you tell me the alternative, which has improved the lot of the ordinary people? What is the system which, in your mind, has been successful?
Communism, the Soviet Union, China, Cuba. Many of these countries have lifted themselves up out of poverty and industrialized with socialism. Libya raised millions of people out of poverty with socialism, it turned a desert country, raised living standards. There's many, many examples of, the Soviet Union became a superpower. China became a superpower. Libya had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. Communism, that would be the alternative.
Most people through most history have lived in tyranny and misery. It's only a very tiny minority at any time that have been able to escape from it. That's the real beauty. That's the real achievement. Now, will you tell me what the alternative system is which has achieved? Well, tell me what. Excuse me.
And I say that elsewhere in the world.
What's the alternative? What's the alternative? What's your alternative?
The free enterprise system is of itself not an alternative because, as you agree, it does not exist. We are arguing really to defend those interventions which have been made by government on the behalf of people in an effort to reduce inequality, in an effort to reduce oppression.
And tell me, which of those are you defending in which of these countries where those interventions have benefited the masses? In most of the countries where you have departed from the free enterprise system, you have had a small class benefited at the expense of the masses. If you take the
Why won't, and of course, she won't just go over basic economic data of the Soviet Union's economic achievements or China's economic achievements or Cuba's economic achievements. She can't do that because she's on PBS and she's an American professor. So he's just saying, oh, where has any other system worked? And
African countries which have become one-party dictatorships, are you going to tell me they have benefited the masses?
They tend to have, yes. Libya, under the leadership of Gaddafi, greatly benefited the population.
I'm astounded by the examples of the third world that are brought into here. Those parts of the non-capitalist world in which the capitalist system has penetrated are typically higher income places than those parts where they haven't. Are you talking any kind of testable hypothesis, or is it just axiomatic that it's so? Because the studies that I've seen indicate that those countries where capitalists have never gone near them are poorer than they've ever been. They were poor before the capitalists got there, they were poor while the capitalists were there, and they're poor after the capitalists have left.
Yeah, all right. Well, that wasn't the clip I was looking for. But there's another clip of Frances Fox Piven. Let me see if I can find it. Where she confronts him about Chile. Let me see if I can find that. Let me see if I can find that clip. That was interesting. You'll notice she wouldn't bring up the example of the Soviet Union. She wouldn't bring that up. And so that's, if you won't stand up for existing socialism, you've already lost the argument. You've already lost the argument. But let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find this clip. Let me see if I can find this clip. I don't think I can find it, but my point that I was making was that there are many, many leftists who the only CIA coup that they ever talk about is Chile. The only CIA coup they ever speak about is Chile. And they don't talk about any of the other ones. Why is that? Well, I recently started reading about something, and this blew my mind. This was one of the biggest projects of the Chilean government. Now, I can't believe that no one ever talks about this. No one ever talks about this. But this is quite an important factor in all of this. Project Cybersyn. Has anyone ever heard of Project Cybersyn? Right? I had never heard of this. I started reading about this recently. What is Project Cybersyn? Project Cybersyn was a project from 1971 to 1973 during the presidency of Salvador Allende, aimed at constructing a distributed decision support system to aid in the management of the national economy. The project consisted of 4 modules: an economic simulator, custom software to check factory performance, an operations room, and a national network of telex machines that were linked to a mainframe computer. The principal architect of the system was British operations research scientist Stafford Beer. And the system embodied his notion of organizational cybernetics in industrial management. One of its main objectives was to devolve decision-making power within industrial enterprises to workplaces in order to develop self-regulation of factories. After the military coup took place on September 11th, 1973, Cybersyn was abandoned and the operations room was destroyed. Stafford Beer, a British consultant in management cybernetics, sympathized with the stated ideals of Chilean socialism, maintaining its democratic system and autonomy of workers instead of imposing a USSR-style top-down command control. And they go on to talk about how Cybersyn was really, really key in the development of modern computers. If you look at it, it was a very, very big aspect of modern computers and artificial intelligence and all of that. And that the Chilean government was clearly working with some faction in the British ruling class to develop computer software to manage an economy. That's not inherently a bad thing, right? I mean, obviously, in a socialist society, such things would be to our benefit, be greatly beneficial. But I can guarantee you that, what's his name, Peter Stafford, and the British computer companies that were backing him, while Salvador Allende may have wanted, or Stafford Beer, that was his name, Stafford Beer, while Stafford Beer, while Salvador Allende may have wanted to use the Cybersyn system for good, I can guarantee you that Stafford Beer and the people who backed Stafford Beer did not want to use them for good. Right? Stafford Beer is a British theorist and consultant, a professor at Manchester Business School, known for his work in the field of operational research and management cybernetics. He joined United States Steel and persuaded the management to fund. He was working for steel corporations. And I mean, he was working for American companies to develop computer programs to manage people, right? This makes me think about that operation. People talk about how at Starbucks they have the computer program that that regulates and assigns people's shifts. You know, they don't have a person who says this person will work here and work there. They have a computer program that does it. And often workers get stuck with the clopening shift. Did you read about this? Where they have to close and open the store at the same time. They only have a couple hours to sleep. They work an 8-hour shift, and then they maybe get to go sleep for 3 hours, and then they come back and they have to work another 8-hour shift. And it devastates them. Right? Stafford Beer was in Chile trying to develop computer systems that would be used by big corporations to manage their workers. That's pretty weird. Obviously, that doesn't justify the coup. But it may indicate why there was more opposition to the Chilean coup from some sections of the ruling class than others. And this is that push and pull that I've talked about between the managerial bourgeoisie, the section of the ruling class that wants to stabilize society and degrow in order to preserve capitalism, and the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie that wants a totally unregulated market in order to maximize their profits. And while Chile was drifting into the Soviet camp and aligning with the Soviet Union, aligning with Fidel Castro, it appears to some degree or other, there was some kind of British intelligence managerial bourgeoisie that was also using Chile as a testing ground for their operations. This is fascinating stuff. Project Cybersyn. And that it appears that a section of the imperialist ruling class was willing to play ball with Salvador Allende. And that a lot of the evil managerial programs, a lot of the simulator technology that is now being used by sections of the ruling class was apparently developed through this project where the Chilean government was cooperating with individuals like Stafford Beer. And this is very, very interesting. And again, this is a kind of analysis you're not going to get elsewhere. And it's very interesting. I'm confident Salvador Allende would have used Project Cybersyn for good, but you can imagine that the British Empire or U.S. Steel or Starbucks or some corporation would probably use it for much more sinister purposes. And you can be sure they're using artificial intelligence and simulators now as they carry out their great reset and their agenda of degrowing the population of the Western countries and driving down living standards. You can be sure, you can be absolutely sure that they are using simulator technology that can probably trace its roots back to Cybersyn. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So again, folks, I gave you analysis there of September 11th, 2001 and September 11th, 1973 that you wouldn't get elsewhere. Because we take things to the next level.